shit. Did you see the quantum internet?
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good evening. It is, let's see, what day is it today? It's Thursday, the 23rd of January, or July, and we've got something to talk about tonight. We're on the verge of a digital economy, and with the adoption of digital currency, whether people realize it or not, it's actually a thing. And if you've got a bank account and use a debit card, then you've been using it this whole time. We've got an impending mortgage crisis, which is also pretty fucked up. And it may actually be the result of a system that was designed to do this to people. And most importantly, our very own Tim Lukasik will be bringing his special brand of what the actual fuck. And let's get started, guys.
Well, hello.
Good evening.
So, I guess like one of the things that I saw today that I think might be a good topic to start off on is apparently the Energy Department is planning for America to have a quantum internet, and the plan has been going on for at least since February, but they announced it today as something that they sound rather serious about it. They released a document, I think it was a 100-page document that laid out the plans for implementation. And a lot of it had to do with basically the quantum internet being necessary for the American economic and information infrastructure needing to be secured against, they framed it as security threats and national security threats, but realistically, that's where it was headed in the first place, like in the grand scheme, whether they knew it or not. So that they're announcing it, a broken clock can be right twice a day, but I'm thinking that this isn't even, I don't think this has anything to do with the orange sherbet administration, because this is too forward thinking to be something that's coming out. Like, there's relatively no real profit motive front loaded into it, which is why I just hesitate to think it came anywhere remotely out of the White House or anybody from that. So when it's the Energy Department, I have a really strong feeling that it's actually coming from the Energy Department, because in my studies, the Energy Department has been very forward thinking in the cybersecurity realm. So I've been actually seeing a lot of Energy Department publications in my my academic research. So this is not actually out of line with the trajectory that they've been on. But what also happens is all those people that have tried to tell you all about blockchain and how blockchain is the future, they're not 100% wrong, but now they're like 50% wrong. And it's not something you can necessarily gloat about, because if you don't understand the quantum internet, it's like you can't really gloat about to those people. But there's a shitload of people that have been trying to say blockchain is the future, when people like myself have been saying, that's one possible future. There's the chance that we can have all these dramatic shifts. Well, the quantum internet is the technology that nobody expected, in the same way that nobody predicted Facebook and what Facebook could have become before it happened. There's no Nostradamus or anybody remotely close Edward Casey or whatever, that Edgar Casey, there's nobody who's predicting anything remotely close to Facebook before it happened. Nobody predicted the quantum internet in this way that they're announcing it, like that far back. So a lot of people who are in the decentralized space have been theorizing about this, but they didn't predict it. Theorizing is different than predicting, in that I'll say, if you are too close in a proximity to the technology being available, and then you're theorizing about it, versus someone who predicted it is like far enough away that the technology is not even on the horizon. So if you're talking about the quantum internet before microchips, that's a prediction because you're not even close. So that's what I'm saying.
So with quantum internet, you're talking about a full-on blanketed across coast to coast, border to border internet for all, and that would be the main new internet. So you're basically giving, like, is it a free market if the market's only in one spot?
It's not meant to be a free market. So let's not
even. Yeah. No, I mean, like, well, it's society's construct of what a free market is. So if everything went bought and sold digitally,
it's not meant to be a free market. It's meant to be a closed market. So let's reframe that, because if you're asking if it's a free market, you're missing what they're trying to do. They're not trying to make it a free market. They're trying to make it a closed market.
Yeah, that was the question I posed. It was like, would it be one if it's in a place that's being controlled? It's not really then, because it's got a control format to it, and that's where you can only be. So if it's the quantum internet, as far as like everyone's money and cyber life and banking, and is that applying to regular just internet across the board, cell phones, laptops, hard drives, like everything?
So let me break this down on two aspects. First off, like, we can debate this if you want. Anybody can debate this. A free market cannot exist in the real world in tandem with like a currency that is state run or operates within a state. Those two things can't coexist.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Say that. Let's just say that from the get-go. Regardless of what state it is, those two things just can't coexist. So the idea of a free market existing in a country is a state that just can't be attained, first off. So in that, what they're trying to do is not in line with the ideal unattainable free market. That's not even what they're trying to do. They're trying to do a closed market, because an open well, we should talk about open versus closed markets rather than free markets, because a free market is it's the extreme of an ideal that can never be attainable in real world, in the same way that the ideal of socialism, in the way that it is thought about, cannot be attained in the real world. Same way communism, anything that's an ideology can't be attained in the real world in the way that it's idealized. So it doesn't matter. It's not knocking the free market. It's knocking all ideologies applied in the real world. So that said, once we're talking about the internet is not the World Wide Web was never a homogeneous entity in the first place. It was always a web of connections between computer houses and server farms. Like, and then on top of that, other individual websites hosted other places. So the internet was never a single entity, and the hosts, the people who were deciding the web addresses that we access, well, that's for the World Wide Web as we know it. There's more than one web. There's like the World Wide Web 2. I think there's the World Wide Web 3 now. And then there's other networks or other webs that Americans don't necessarily use that may be for other countries. Or then there's the dark web, which is effectively like, it's just a different set of addresses that they're working with, hosted by different. So what we have is a really super advanced switchboard for dialing into people's computers, which effectively is just calling somebody's computer and getting the files off of their computer. That's what the internet is, simplified. but we see it as a homogeneous entity because most of the things that we visit start with www. So every time somebody visits something on the World Wide Web, they're only going to a certain part of things that exist digitally that can be accessed through the output or the inlet into your home. Well, it's the inlet and output. You need to upload and download. So it doesn't like that thing is arbitrary in that it's the numbers that you dial to access the set of computers or whatever, and that's where your internet service provider is going to give you access to a certain set. They can close off some, but they can't close off all of them. So that's why there's a whole lot more that people can access that they don't know they have access to, but it's because they are not understanding what they're necessarily doing when they're using the internet.
Well, so with the quantum internet, are we just putting all of our eggs in one basket? Now you're going to be able to find every single data trace information of anything you buy, shop, what you do with your bills, where you travel to, hotels you stay in, your internet at home, your internet on your phone.
What you're talking about is how it basically works now.
Yeah.
Quantum internet would be...
So with getting rid of money and including that into there with the quantum internet, it's basically just putting all of our eggs in one basket, a bigger basket.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. That's like a...
that's a dangerous reduction.
That's a complete inaccurate way to describe it in that. So when you're talking about a quantum internet, the different nodes you have are they are in superposition with each other so that if one spins, they all spin. So they all get simultaneous information upload, but they can all have the capacity to operate independently. So it's this weird thing of like quantum computing doesn't work in a way that humans really can understand super easy because it doesn't really work in a way that aligns with anything in our understanding of physics.
We don't think the way that quantum computing works.
Exactly. So I'm not trying to dismiss anyone's capacity to understand. I'm just saying when I'm trying to explain it, this is for someone to think about this because the first time you're listening, or not the first time, when you're thinking about quantum computing, even as someone who's in cybersecurity, in algorithm creation, deep into the technological creation, it takes a very long time to truly grasp the implications of something that is computing in multiple places, all of the things and different things simultaneously. It just is not the way our brain works. So it really when you start to really understand what's happening, it starts to sound like a deity or a god. So that's why, again, it's like, I don't want to sound, we're putting all our eggs in one basket, because quantum computing has been being developed for a while. So the whole reason we can move towards a quantum internet is because there have been so many different companies or organizations working on quantum computing, so it's become stable.
One way to think of it is that instead of one basket, it's almost an infinite number of baskets based on the number of nodes that are available. And as soon as you have, hold on. And so once you have an infinite number of baskets, you actually replicate an infinite number of eggs. And all of these nodes ensure that each outcome is verified by the next node. And if it doesn't, then we know that there's a problem with one of the nodes. One of the really interesting things that I learned when I was involved in cryptocurrency was, there was a lot of it that was very hardware dependent. And one of the things that quantum computing, quantum information science aims to resolve is that when data is being processed, it's not necessary to have supercomputers everywhere. In fact, once a generally or a consumer grade quantum computer is available, and we're talking 5, 10, 15 years from now, where it's widely available, it'll be possible to engage in the quantum internet basically seamlessly. We won't have to worry about this. There's a lot of prohibitive, cost prohibitive barriers to engaging in really in supercomputing or high level information systems, but that won't be the case. It's actually a very democratizing way of adjusting to a future data system.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. What's the overall usage once we get to there? Like with them, Chris. Sorry, you were talking about how it was being kind of like quick that they're coming out with this, and that they're going to move to it a little bit faster. Is it security reasons mainly?
Exactly. So what ended up happening is the way everybody, I'm sure, like I know Tien paid attention to it, but everybody realizes that Bitcoin sort of happened around them, and a lot of people in America ignored it. So what occurred is that most of Americans' transactions are already digital, and they don't really realize it. So you have Americans using digital transactions for, like, I want to say 85% of what they already do, not realizing it, working with old systems. So they're like, most people's banks use what's called SHA-256. So secure hash algorithm 256, meaning it has 256 bits of information to create the digital key. Why is this relevant? The reason it's relevant is that as encryption got better, there became more options to start securing transactions that banks did not upgrade their systems to. So globally, you had the SWIFT system using SHA-256 getting hacked, and then people in America not realizing what's going on around them. So there's like, I think it was $800 million worth of hacks in India. Then there was some hacks that happened in Europe. Then there was hacks that happened in America. And the SWIFT system, which is basically the international bank money transfer system, got completely compromised in a way that if you understand what happened, then you realize, like, oh shit, our economy's fucked. So Americans couldn't really fathom like what happened on that scale without flipping out and then going in their bunkers. So the media kind of hid it from them. And then the Equifax breaches happened. So then you had American social security numbers. Like, I think it's like something of about 150 social security numbers were compromised. So you have effectively our entire credit and social security system being compromised definitively. This is no longer a drill. This has happened in the past.
Yeah, we're in it now. Yeah.
People are too reactionary to actually grasp the implications of what that means. So what I think is happening is that the opportunist government is using what we have to sort of transition people into a different dollar paradigm, a different digital paradigm, and a different security paradigm without ever blowing the whistle to what happened, because Americans won't be able to comprehend it. And if they even come close to grasping it, they are conditioned to flip out, and then they'll flip out. So it's like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, transitioning our security. So this is kind of why I'm like, this is kind of like a well thought out execution to deploy the quantum internet, because people kind of just need to have the quantum internet securing their shit, because you have too many people willing to download an app because they want to find out their IQ.
One of the really interesting things that I learned when I was mining cryptocurrency was the concept of the quantum attack, where somebody would set up their own segregated node and they would run in tandem with the actual blockchain itself, and then they would insert their chunk of time into the hyperledger, which would then cause this kind of weird cascade as all the other nodes tried to verify that data. And in that period of time, it was like lightning fast too. In that short period of time, they would make transactions or trades or exchanges of some kind, and they would make money doing this, and they would steal money this way. And so what happens, and that was the limitation of our existing grid-based internet. And so what I think the promise of a quantum internet really, it takes us to a place where the data transaction, the handoff of data itself is happening so quickly that there's no time for somebody to initiate like a quantum attack.
That's exactly correct.
So,
and one of the things about, like, I'm glad you pointed this out, because what I was trying to get to with the security is that now the banks are susceptible to those quantum attacks, but also Bitcoin and any blockchain that's built on the same technology as the SHA-256, which is what Bitcoin was originally built on, which is why they were trying to other stuff and forking to segregated witness, and they had all the infighting. Yet I digress. That attack that Tien just framed was originally theoretical, but now it's actually possible, which is why we need a quantum internet in America. But Americans just had no idea that all that shit that we described just even happened.
I saw that a lot of the impetus or driving force behind developing the quantum internet at the rate that it's being developed and at the robust level of resourcing that is being developed is because of a lot of private sector involvement between the private sector, the federal government, and educational institutions. And it seems like the projected plan is to create an initial backbone for the quantum internet that's comprised of the federal government, private sector organizations, and educational institutions. But what we see are high volume, like extraordinarily high volume financial transactions between the federal government and the private sector, essentially, in order to keep our economy afloat. And if those are susceptible to security attacks, or if they're at risk, then it's not necessarily the motive to develop it for broader dissemination, but more to control private financial transactions.
Well, and it's crazy because there's a lot of shit that goes on in our government that is not necessarily related to destroying shit. So I actually submitted a design proposal to DARPA a couple of years ago. And even got a response, so I know they saw it. But what ends up happening is, they had put out requests for proposals too. So I didn't just send DARPA some shit like, look at me, but it's like what ends up happening is they have all these things going on, and what is visible ends up being seen through the military industrial lens. So then we have shit that gets thrown into that conversation when something's being politicized, and then some shit that might be working towards actual progress ends up getting defunded because some bullshit ass politician uses it for a fucking stump speech somewhere, and it becomes like some spin, and then the whole bill gets defunded for shit like this, which again, that's where it's like, the way that it's being put forth, I don't even think there's a possibility that some senator could come in and stop it. So that's great. But that's how we end up getting proposals for a quantum internet and never actually having it, because some dumbass wants to fucking keep his job as a senator instead of actually putting the country forward.
Well, that brings up the question of how much technological advancement within private sector industries that are constituents or have high-powered individuals who are constituents of politicians that hold off on advancing certain technologies because it's not profitable. Because if you go to a hospital, a lot of the intake software, a lot of the networks that they use, a lot of the web-based applications that they use are extraordinarily outdated. Even though the medical practices and techniques that they use and some of the equipment is highly advanced. So I'm wondering about the implications of personal health care and patient privacy in regards to the development or the dissemination of the quantum internet.
I mean, that's just a problem with capitalism, because anybody who is going to take a flight in this bullshit year, I dare you to look at the computer at the counter for the person issuing your ticket, because that computer is probably older than you. In a lot, I want to say 80% of the cases when I was traveling a lot, I would just always look over the counter to see that computer. And God damn it, if it wasn't 9 out of 10 times, they would be using like I don't even know if it was like a bubble jet printer. It might have been like the laser, like the laser printers that were new in the 80s type printers that had the little serrated edges with the holes and
the
wheel roll.
yeah, and like they were
Roller
using those
feed.
types of printers, and the actual computers using like COBOL, and the interface is like straight up fucking looking like DOS.
Most airlines use Sabre or Apollo, and more recently they use a GDS environment called Amadeus, but they all look like COBOL.
Yeah.
Could flight navigation software be connected to quantum internet, and would that be something that would be applied to military or aerospace endeavors first over commercial?
I think it's important to note that a quantum internet doesn't mean, it describes a variation of a communication network that we already have, but it's more sophisticated. So if it can be done on the system that we have now, it can be done in a quantum environment.
Right.
It just increases security.
No, but I think the issue is what Daniel's asking is, are they going to be able to have something that is not re-outfitted, retrofitted to take advantage of the quantum internet and actually make use of it? And I don't think that's possible. And that's the problem is, if you have a quantum internet, but then you have the airport terminal running on these fucking old ass user interfaces, well then yeah, everything on the quantum internet's going to be secure. But once you get inside the airport, yeah, they're going to fucking hack in through your shit because it's not secured on the quantum internet. So anything that's not going to be on the quantum internet will be susceptible to hacking via other quantum attacks coming through other vectors, even down to the power lines.
So that was actually something that came up when I was doing software development. They talked about how a quantum computing environment would allow. Well, okay, so at the time we were developing a platform that allowed to search for the fastest route possible to get somebody from point A to point B, the quickest amount of time with like meeting certain business requirements like cost and seating preference and all that kind of stuff. And I remember asking like, because qubits became a thing. The first 1 qubit system had just emerged, and it was working. And so the idea was that they could actually create a system that could determine the fastest route in one search without having to run through all of the variables over and over again, which was the dilemma, is that the search required continuously running like the same parameters over and over again until it generated the entire list. But with the quantum environment, it would generate that list instantly. So once a database like that is uploaded, really it becomes an issue of how quickly can that database be updated at the user level to keep flights up to date. And so at that point, it's really, you would get your flight information instantaneously. These things could be translated relatively easily, I think. It's just a matter of the next generation of quantum information scientists to develop who can figure out this translation matrix.
Yeah, because again, this is where what ended up happening was the blockchain space and the crypto space were developing under the premise that quantum computing was like very far off in the future.
But it wasn't.
And yeah, it wasn't nearly as far off into the future as they thought. So some of the people within that space were seen as naysayers or party poopers or whatever, and people were like trying not to listen to the people in the crypto space who were talking about, having quantum attack resistant chains and things like that. So there was a huge rift in the crypto space, and that's why I don't even really identify as being part of the crypto space.
Yeah.
Chain community, because
I think there were a lot of people who were trying to defend the hardware market itself. I think a lot of people were still very invested in very expensive hardware, and they were trying to maintain an environment because they were making money. They were trying to maintain an environment that didn't make their systems obsolete in a few years, even though they were going to be obsolete in 6 months.
I was talking to people who were like buying stock in AMD and Nvidia, and I'm like, oh, you need to fuck all the way out of this space. Like you are the problem. And they're talking about GPU advancement and talking about their gains on their stocks. And I'm like, man, you don't give a fuck about the technology. Like, you can pretend all you want, but I see through those people.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, they can talk a big game, but when you really break it down, those people make themselves transparent at some point, and that's where I'm like, I don't want to be around somebody who's in the crypto space. Not to say that you can't buy stocks in something that you're loving, working with, or involved in. But the way that those people talk about it and then try to pretend that they're in the shit for advancing technology, like, no, that person's just lying. They're lying to themselves and me, and I'm not having that shit.
I think it's one thing to set up a node and set up a bunch of miners so that you can help crunch the blockchain itself, and that which actually supports the technology, and you get paid. You make a little bit of money, and then as you cycle through hardware, you buy new hardware, and you can sell off your old hardware and all that stuff. And that's one way to maintain that part of the economy. But I think if you're not actively supporting a node in some way, shape, or form, then it's just investing. And it's like you just said, it's disingenuous to be like, yeah, I'm all about crypto, but I don't own any hardware. Or I don't even know how the software works. I just like it because the numbers go up and down, and I see this chart that looks like the candlestick graph that I'm used to in Forex trading, and so I can make some money doing this. That's disingenuous. That's not that work.
Thing. So you don't even get paid to run a node for Bitcoin. You only get paid to mine. Yeah. And that's super fucked. Like, then you have traders telling people, oh yeah, you should set up a Bitcoin node. Like, for what? For what? I'm paying electricity so somebody else can make money and store data on my shit and not make any money while the miners make money? You're telling me the miners make money, but not the people who run the fucking nodes? Why? It makes zero sense. But it's because the people in the Bitcoin space who ran there first didn't even understand what nodes were doing. So they didn't come to the defense of the people who operate nodes, which is also why that shit's not going to be sustainable long term, especially in the face of a government-sponsored quantum internet that's going to have quantum-secured nodes. Like, why would you put your money on a fucking SHA-256 node when the government's going to have a fucking quantum node? That's just dumb now. Bitcoin sounds like, I tried to tell people Bitcoin was the brick phone of blockchain like communication, transmission, whatever, because there's multiple types of things happening on the Bitcoin blockchain, but it's still the brick phone version of it. Now we have the discussion of the quantum internet, and then people who don't know what they're talking about will be like, what about a blockchain built on top of that? It's like, well, you'll have blockchains built on top of it, but they'll be quantum blockchains and not SHA-256. So like the Bitcoin blockchain is gonna be, I mean, it already is basically effectively defunct. But those people who are monetarily invested in that aren't willing to accept that shit. As soon, because the United States has already been talking about creating their own Federal Reserve coin or dollar, whatever you want to call it. And now the energy department is talking about creating a quantum internet. Those two things solve the problems that Bitcoin said it was trying to solve in a way that now, if our government invests in them, we'll have new jobs to build that shit. We can guarantee it was made in America, so we will know that fucking China or Russia didn't put a backdoor in that shit for later, for 10 years down the road, like they could have with all the Bitcoin hardware. Because all that shit didn't come from America. All that shit came from China. So all those people talking about, oh yeah, you can use Bitcoin. Well, how do you know there's not a fucking backdoor? Because they did that shit with the ant miners. That was a whole thing that a lot of people didn't realize happened, that people like myself had to keep track of. Because I got to keep track of all these types of breaches. So then 7 or 10 years later, when people try to make these arguments, I can be like, oh yeah, you didn't hear about this shit in 2013. that debunks this entire argument that happened fucking 7 years ago already. But that's the whole reason I'm the specialist.
Yeah, I for a very, very short period of time, I was looking. I think what were they, like the was it S7 or was it the S6 that had
they
the
did
problem?
a series on it was like S1, S9.
I know, but there was an announcement. I think it was the S7 that they announced was going to be like the super affordable. You can upgrade the power supply. You can upgrade RAM. You can do all sorts of things to modify it after the fact. But then it was also the first one that was identified to have this really strange backdoor in the firmware, which allowed Antminer to, or the people who manufactured it, to control it from the back end and siphon off, your hard-earned coins.
It's called Ant Bleed.
Yeah,
named after the other breach called Heartbleed, in which two-factor authentication was breached, which a lot of people still don't realize has happened, where you can get your entire fucking either Google or Apple account fucking hijacked, and people can send messages as you until the breach gets fucking found out. Like, people didn't even realize this shit was happening. The only reason I found out about the 2FA breach was because somebody hacked my friend's account and started sending me messages asking me for money. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like this dude. He would never fucking like that. And I called him and he's like, no, I didn't message you. And I sent him pictures of the message from himself. And he's like, what the fuck? And that was how I found out about it, because I was on the front lines. And this is the type of shit people don't even fucking know about in 2020, where it's like, again, because Americans are too reactionary, the media can't tell Americans about this stuff, because then they'd flip the fuck out and start burning their iPhones. That's what would happen.
Yeah, there's a brief period of time when I was thinking about getting a ASIC miner, like an ant miner, but it was the S7 that I was actually looking at, and I'm pretty sure that you sent me a link. It said, "Don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do it." And then immediately, I asked why. And you're like, "Well, first off, good luck actually getting one, because they're always sold out." But it turned out that, like, you were not only right, but you were right on a level that was like, the entire crypto space didn't even erupt for about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, every blog, every news group, every forum that I was frequenting, the tone changed from, how do I maximize this, or how do I configure this or that or some other thing, or how do I script mine, or how do I do all these other things, to, oh my god, I'm bleeding out right now. Somebody's been hacking my shit, and I don't have any. They took all my coins. It was incredible. And then I realized, like, man, it's a good thing I didn't drop $2,000 on a fucking miner. Crap.
I think another thing that's important to note is that the United States isn't the only country working towards quantum internet.
Oh yeah.
So we're gonna have a at least in the beginning, it's going to be sounds like it's going to be a closed network. And then will that be able to communicate with other networks, or is this network specifically designed to only interact with things within it? Or is it going to be able to communicate without as well?
I'm sure they're going to have like international agreements for other countries to get access to their shit. Because again, this is like, the whole reason they're building it is because the internet naming convention and all of e-commerce is at risk currently. So doing the same dumbass shit and just being like, oh yeah, we'll have all of our fucking server farms in India again. We'll have all of our equipment coming from China again. They're at least not looking to make those same mistakes coming out the gate. So you can assume they're not going to just give anybody access. And that's where, again, it's like, the whole reason it's being made is because the original deployment of the internet was only lucky to be decentralized enough to keep it from being susceptible to an extinction level event. We only got lucky it was mostly decentralized, because what ended up happening was, because one major organization didn't win out in internet service providers, our ISPs and access points are diverse enough that a single nation actor can't hack it all. That's just a stroke of luck. It sounds like they're not trying to make that same mistake again.
So sounds like there are going to have to be quantum credentials, essentially.
Right. Well, okay, so this is a good place to talk about. So what happened is the private key infrastructure got created retroactively to retroactively solve the problem of having a completely open internet in the first place, because the idea was originally to have a completely open internet, and then they realized, oh shit, this is a horrible idea because criminals will use it, so we need to figure out ways to close off information but also monitor information at a higher level, so we can say these things are channels we need to close off because they're being used for illicit purposes. So that's why internet service providers can see things on a packet level and not necessarily know what's happening on a packet level, which is why in order to understand some things, most of the time you need at least 3 sources of information. Like, you need to triangulate truth, not just data. You need to triangulate truth. So in the context of network systems, when you're talking about the way that they're established now, you really need 3 points of data to be able to understand what's happening when somebody's trying to keep you from understanding what's happening. If you can get 3 points of data, you can find out anything on the internet as long as it's digital. All you need is 3 points of data. A lot of people think there's some shit that's unhackable. Nothing is unhackable. There's just like different points of security. Some things take thousands of years to hack, and that's where the quantum machines will take what used to take thousands of years, and now they'll be able to hack that shit in a matter of seconds in most cases. Not true for everything. So this is where quantum resistant stuff comes into, like, people have been trying to develop quantum resistant systems, but it's all theoretical until it starts coming under attack to say, oh yeah, we had a quantum attack and resisted it. So there's all these things about where we're at in computing that, like, 99% of what's happening at the highest level is theoretical shit being tested in real time against other theoretical shit. But that's the highest level. People on Facebook aren't using that technology. Like, anytime you're on Facebook, you're not using that. Like, somebody's not going to need the quantum internet to serve Facebook. But ultimately, the United States will have their users on Facebook using the quantum internet because the users are too fucking stupid to protect themselves from having their data harvested through apps on Facebook. So that's why the United States government has to then build the quantum internet to protect Americans from themselves. Ultimately, it's this weird thing, and that's why it's like all of government's not evil. It's like, it's weird. It's really weird.
That's the system itself that we want to pretend is broken, but in a lot of ways, it's actually functioning exactly as it's supposed to.
Half of it does what we want it to do, and half of it doesn't. And that's why what you're focusing on is really going to determine how you talk a lot of times when speaking about government. Because half of it works.
So you were talking about, like, backdoors on phones and stuff. So I had Virgin Mobile for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And there was sub information in folders that were like entire conversations that I had on the phone, not text was shared with anybody. And then I started looking into, like, stuff that was going on in Virgin Mobile. I looked up some stuff on Reddit, and this is like 5 or 6 years ago now. I tried to look it up on Reddit right now. I couldn't find the information from it. But when I was looking it up, there was all kinds of software development that was coming from refurbished phones going out of Taiwan back into China, being sold into the American market when Apple products dropped. And a lot of those Apple products had the same factories that produced stuff for iPhone, produced stuff for, like, HTC, Virgin Mobile rehashed phones, anything that's gone through, like, a PTS electronics or something like that. And there was tons of backdoors. I started reading stuff on that. And then, like, I started going through my phone's folders and show all hidden systems. And I literally there was parts that were just huge chunks of space that, like, I went through, and it was full on dialogue. Only my end, though. It wasn't another person's dialogue back, but just like 5 or 6 really big files of just whole entire things that it recorded. And then a weird sub Facebook one that was when I looked further into it, like the app itself, when I had it on that Virgin mobile phone, it said extra features, and it actually said it would just turn on sometimes and take a picture, turn on sometimes, record audio, get commercials when they play, hear certain tones in commercials and activate the phone. And then it would just do that, and it just had data. I couldn't read it or understand it, but there was just these folders full of data saying when it says automatic on, and all these little tiny like commands that were programs to make it when it kicks on and stuff were the same that I was reading that was happening to the Apple phones, that like in 3 months they have a battery drain app that kicks in and just drains it all. But they were data mining a crap ton of information, sending it to Taiwan or Singapore, where there's like a couple companies between the two places that were rehashing all old phones into other stuff and putting in their own like malicious shit and then sending it back to America. And it took me by a big surprise seeing like dictated versions of what I talked about in a phone call.
Yeah, so you've seen it, man. So you've seen,
and that was scary. Like when I first saw it, I actually sweated a little bit. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, because people don't want to realize, like, people don't want to accept that shit is real or that it can happen to them, because then you have to be more on the ball and you have to be more judicious about what you download. You can't be taking those quizzes. You can't be fucking passing videos. There's a whole lot of shit you can't do once you realize that what you just said is possible to happen to a non-security expert who's not working on the front lines of cybersecurity. Like, you just had your fucking microphone monitored. That's why it's only on your side and not the people you're listening to. It's because they're using your microphone. So why are they using your microphone? I can't tell you. I don't fucking know. But you had your microphone listened to and had your fucking conversations recorded and sent off to some server somewhere through a back door in your phone that you didn't know was there. You're not even fucking Secret Service, bro. What do you think about the Secret Service? Or what do you think about the fucking president who's on Twitter? You think there's not a fucking backdoor on that?
Oh, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. Like, if it could just be, like, if me, a simpleton on this stuff, can dig in his phone and, like, do some research on how to find this stuff and see where it's at.
But that's because
I can do it in a few minutes, like, and it's that prevalent, yeah, then it could be on every single other level, all the way up. The possibility is endless on that, you know? Like, that's creepy.
It is
like,
on every single level.
It's like, that is a product of not building that shit in America, in that those things have to be built at the cost that allows them to be produced without the fear of a backdoor being put in them. And if that means that what we see as a cell phone ends up costing $20,000 and the average person has to go back to either a flip phone or we have a government program to create smartphones, then that's what we do, because that's what India did. And they put 5 million smartphones in the poorest people's hands by making them themselves and fucking distributing them and creating a backbone for their own communication that they have a backdoor in it because they made them themselves. So that's some shit where the way that it's been framed, like it's impossible to keep moving forward and keep operating on computers built in Taiwan, Vietnam, China, or Korea. We can't do that, or Japan as a nation. It's just not it's not feasible. Like, nothing against those countries, but it's just not possible in 2020 moving forward. Like, that's how you get your fucking F-35 fleet grounded, because they have one unknown chip from China that they don't know what the fuck it does, and then they discover it. It's the size of a Tic Tac, and that's how you end up losing your whole F-35 fleet for unknown amount of time.
Oh,
again, it's like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying on another hack level. I think it was before school let out last year. They caught a Russian kid here in Bloomington, Indiana, that had a black market chip recoder, so he could take any gift card. And apparently, this kid like went around and bought like $10 fucking gift cards from like Kohl's, Walmart, a few different places, went home and reprogrammed them. And the IU Credit Union on 17th Street by the stadium. And then the IU Credit Union they built out in Ellettsville. This kid was going there on a daily basis and using different cards and getting the machine or tricking the machine or programming it somehow not to give him money instantly, but once the code strip went in there, reprogrammed it and took money out of accounts and put it into his account. And then he at home, digital banking, transfer money over to a different account, send money back home, buy shit with that other account. Well, the IU credit union caught on. I think FBI was in town for that one. I think I served them when I was working at Scholars. Before that, when they were looking into when Nix got hacked for $1.2 million a year and a half before that, on one day, and it was just credit card scams. So they found out that these two IU credit unions had it, and they traced it back to this one kid. Wow. And he was a international student from Russia. His family had sent him with, it was packed with him, I think, is what the police report said, that he brought it with him. And they his family was like, oh yeah, no, do this. And it's a way to get money. And so he apparently had something like $102,000 in a month is what really set it off, because so many people use both IU credit unions. And he had a shit ton of money. He had his house or his apartment that he rented, because he was living like a college student. The apartment he was in was just filled with shit. He was just buying stuff on the internet constantly, because he'd just go home, and once a whole 24 hours goes by, logs into IU credit union, all these little microtransactions of money get sent to his account. He transfers it to a PayPal account, and then just goes fucking ape with it, and just bought a bunch of shit. And it set off a big cybersecurity thing here. And they're trying to get a police to cybersecurity to happen at the Bloomington Police Department. I think my friend Levi Minnick that I went to school with is on that.
I think they actually instituted it. I want to say they might have just. Oh no! I was thinking about the U.S. one. The U.S. did it because I know I just recently saw something about the cyber division, but that was the federal level.
So the ATMs that they hacked, is that what you're talking about? That server, that old school, it's still pretty hackable.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, because it's all of what he was doing is figuring out the private key to access the accounts that were available using he probably had the magnetic strip that he was using on the card. It probably had a what would effectively be an administrator level private key that then would give him entry into any account, and he would probably target specific accounts that would then be oh, I'm going to use this account today. And then there's a couple ways he could have done it. Either that, or then he's got a program that's generating keys for specific accounts and matching them. Because there's only really two ways to do it. Either there's a master key, or he's figuring out individual keys that match up with individual accounts. There's really only two ways to go about it. And the fact that he had one card makes me think he might have been he might have had a machine attached to it that would do the key on the fly for the individual account.
Oh, John Connor in T2.
Exactly, but that shit's possible today.
Yeah.
The shit that movie magic in '96 or '92 or whatever, that shit is possible today.
It's real.
Yeah. So
people don't understand that shit.
So Apple is they've been well, they don't actually manufacture it. It's done by I think TSMC and Samsung. But Apple's been developing their own chips, their ARM chips, and they're about to transition their MacBook and eventually their Pro line and iMac line into using their in-house ARM chips, and it's called Apple Silicon. And those could be manufactured in America. It would just cost more. And then Amazon uses a variation of ARM Neoverse called Graviton, which is a server processor built on ARM architecture. It's a 64-bit architecture. And those are being used right now as we speak to run Amazon AWS. So it is possible for an American-designed chip to be manufactured in America, which could eventually supplant and completely replace all of our reliance on foreign manufactured chips. And to be fair, Intel develops almost all of their chips somewhere in Arizona. And I'm pretty sure AMD has a design house in the United States as well. It's just infinitely cheaper to manufacture elsewhere. But I think 15 years ago almost, Intel was, they were being applauded by the Chinese government for deciding to build in China. And they built essentially, the Chinese government built a city in Shandong province in western China, and it was going to be the Intel super factory. And they were going to develop next generation chips and build next generation architecture there. And I remember telling Chris about this, and we had a really good laugh about it. And then 5 years later, what was it, Spectre and Meltdown happened. This is a long game. This is a really long game. And so we can. There's a way out of it. It's just people are going to have to be willing to pay more for their mobile device, for their fondle slab.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also brings into focus the security gaps that we have with our existing devices and our existing capacity to transfer information over secure networks. For instance, with that chip reader, like that was essentially getting the digital fingerprint and all of the information from the digital fingerprint about each chip that was being reassigned. And that makes me think of how whenever somebody accesses basically any website, the digital fingerprint of essentially the machine, as well as the browser, as well as any plugins or drivers that are used by that machine, that's information that can be gathered by that site. So if you're talking about 3 points of information only being necessary, there's only so much masking somebody can do with the existing systems.
Exactly right. And that's the issue that people don't understand. And when you lay it out like that, it's clear that you understand the problem that I was trying to present, because what ends up happening is I have to present this problem in a way to make people grasp that there is actually a problem, but that there's also a way out of it in a way that then doesn't make them flip out and fucking throw their cell phone against the wall. Because part of it is, again, this stuff has been there and we've all basically had it baked into our environment. But fortunately, we just produce so much information and we're all not Secret Service agents. So for now, nobody's paying attention to any of us. That shit can change at the drop of a fucking dime. Like,
right. That's why the Cambridge Analytica issue was such a big deal to people, because that was an instance where everybody's digital fingerprints and all of the information produced by their machines and all of their personal browsing information was essentially caught up per usual, but then put into a data dump in order to make money for people.
Right. And again, I think that's where, having worked on different projects, I've worked on trying to build, it didn't try. We built a social media network that people to surf, but nobody fucking cared at the time because they didn't understand how their data was being mined and sold, and B, they didn't care to make money off of like just general surfing or using social media. And that's where, again, it's like right now, the browser that I have open, I'm getting paid to have that open because it pops up ads every hour. Like, it's not a whole lot, but over time, it's paid a couple cable bill or internet bills. And it's like, that's just because I know that there are things that will actually pay me for my time and my attention, whereas other people monetize my time and attention without me getting anything for it. So if somebody's making money off some shit at this point in 2020, I better have a fucking cut of that too, or else I'm taking my attention somewhere else. I have that option in 2020.
Well, I think that's part of, I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that chunk of data that Facebook installs on your phone is a functional miner. It doesn't really produce anything for us, but I'm pretty sure that that's part of the grand web of LibraCoin. Because, we've talked about how, especially you and I both talked about how we noticed an increase in video card utilization during Facebooking sessions, and how of course the utilization has gone down now that we've both upgraded our video cards, but we still see extra utilization with Facebook. And I'm actually convinced that it's a browser miner at this point.
I'm not, I think that's actually one of the more rational and more Occam's razor aligned explanations of what's happening. Because if you think about it, if Facebook proposes that they have their CPU mine Bitcoin in the background of people's computer, and all the money goes to Facebook and its shareholders, and they don't have to tell the fucking users because they signed the terms of service where Facebook can just do that shit without, they already got their permission. So they don't need to tell them. Well, of course they're going to fucking do that because that's a great idea.
Yep.
Like, why wouldn't they do that?
Well,
I'd do that if I ran Facebook.
They'd be stupid not to.
We've spoken before about our respective machines' CPU usage while a Facebook page is open versus while it's not open. And there's a significant difference in system efficiency and power usage during that period of time.
Yeah, and that's what, one of the reasons I restrict my Facebook usage to one machine only. And that's because that's how I know that there's some shit that happens to my machine only when I'm using Facebook, because I'm so scientific about my machine usage. I don't use Zoom on more than one machine, and it's not the same machine I use Facebook on. So now that I'm not using Facebook on this machine, Zoom I'm not really having any problems with, whereas before I used to get a shitload of problems with Facebook or with Zoom because I was using Facebook on the same machine.
Yep.
Now that I'm not using Facebook on here, Zoom has given me zero problems. And that's where I'm like, it's crazy to then start to see what these companies are doing. Like, I'll look at different news sites. Fox News is probably mining their visitors. They're probably using their visitors' CPUs to mine. CNN is probably using their visitors' shit to mine. And then there's places like, what's it called? BBC. Like, I don't think BBC is using their visitors' shit to mine. I just have never had a problem on my computer with BBC. Never once.
So with Facebook and Zuck's, this would be like more apparent now for data mining, because it's how much you get searched through, how much you see, how much information is there. Do you think the reason why he is such a power player and also just in the news a lot now of why it needs to be even contending that he has to go to court is because of the amount of information he actually has? Is because if they're mining it, he's got a lifeline on every single person that uses Facebook and a complete different book of information than what other people are seeing. So he's a threat, because like a threat, but also like a spotlight because of how much data and information he has.
So I think that's spot on for a couple of reasons. What ends up happening is when you are in what you believe to be a free market and you are in a startup company and you have an idea, you put yourself in a position where you can be manipulated by forces and people who have agendas that go a lot further than you can comprehend, because you're so focused on your product and your plan that when Mark Zuckerberg originally created Facebook, and if you look at the trajectory of how it grew from being a college sociopathic...
It was a hot or not thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sociopathic way to objectify people. What it became after 10 years of not being profitable, let's not forget it was not profitable for 9 or 10 years, seemed to directly be tied with its capacity to data mine its users while also working with law enforcement and seemingly being resistant to failure in one of the worst economic markets ever. So when everybody else was losing their shit in the economy, Facebook was rising. Then you look at something like MySpace, which arose and had a meteoric fall around the same time. If you look at all the factors, one of the big differences is that MySpace was not really working with law enforcement that much. So what I'm getting at is I don't necessarily think that Mark Zuckerberg is an agent of the government. What I think is when you work with the U.S. government, they'll invest in your company through shadow investors. They'll give you subsidies. They'll support you. As soon as you get too much power, they'll bring you in front of Congress, do this little circus to remind you who put you there. And then if they don't feel like they are reining that person in, they'll try to start threatening them from all these different angles. So then, again, this is where Mark Zuckerberg has effectively gone rogue. He's no longer in control of the U.S. government. So now we're not getting movies about Zuck. We're not having Ashton Kutcher or what's the name, Jesse Eisenberg pretend to be Zuck and make you like him and be endearing and give you this whole fake interpretation of Zuck, because that's no longer what they're trying to do. Now they want to tear down Zuck, so they give you this fucking data Zuck, the Zuck with too much fucking sunscreen on his face, looking like he's a robot trying to figure out how to surf, looking stupid because they're not trying to make you like Zuck anymore because he's no longer under their control and he's legitimately exploiting us. So now we shouldn't like Zuck. So again, there's this whole thing of like, you know, when you can create a scapegoat, you can monitor people and have them fucking giving you their information and then scapegoat Mark Zuckerberg and have them not even realize who fucking built Mark Zuckerberg in the process, because it wasn't an Illuminati. It wasn't a single group. It was some shit that happened gradually over time. And it wasn't this conspiracy. It's some shit that happens when one person figures out how to game subsidies, and then when the government gets sick of that person being too powerful. It's this clash that happens. Same thing happened with fucking Elon. That's why the SEC started going after him. He went rogue.
Yeah. Well, they only needed them because of their information and what they could do. And that information trade is what made the bargaining chip for them and why it's still happening.
The government,
that's the like, he's going to be stuck in that position of power, but also in a bad light, and like the control is always going to go back and forth, is just because of not just him, the information that he now possesses because of that, and how far he went with it. Like you were right, like with his how powerful he got with having that information. That's the only reason why he's that powerful.
The government will prop up a person to use them as a backdoor, make that person think they're the next fucking Tony Stark, because that person is legitimately dumb enough to get gassed up on their own hype. And then as soon as that person goes rogue and starts fucking tweeting about dumb shit, then the government pulls away the facade and says, oh shit, Elon is not wearing any clothes. This guy was dumb the whole fucking time. Sorry we made you think he was smart, but guess what? His fucking parents owned a diamond mine. He got there fucking because of colonialism. He's not that smart. He never fucking graduated. He never got a graduate degree or some shit. Like, then they'll start telling you all the shit they should have told you in the first place as to why he was never actually the next, or like a real life Tony Stark. He was just fiction too. Elon Musk was always fiction.
When you talk about government funding and the desire to control a corporation or an organization and its output, as well as its resources and its growth, and then once the head of such an organization reaches a point of international or national prominence and power, that it's like harvesting, essentially. I think the government is trying to play a long game in discrediting some of these individuals, or trying to build cases that they can draw upon long term in order to gain inroads into siphoning assets away from an organization that is no longer necessarily profitable for them in the short term.
And you're spot on, because I'll point to two examples in Martin Shkreli and Elizabeth Holmes. Those are two examples that have already happened of exactly what you just described, because then the government had to throw those people under the bus because people got too close to the fucking grand scheme while people were watching. And it's like, then as soon as people started picking up on Elizabeth Holmes' harvest, like they were trying to farm Elizabeth Holmes out, and they got a few good harvests off of her. But as soon as they tried to get that big harvest and the fucking journalists were too close, nah, Elizabeth Holmes, she's the fraudster. We're going to fucking get a case against her. Even though she was doing this shit for years under our noses, we were making money off of it the whole time. Now that y'all got close while we were letting it happen, we're going to take her down. And then y'all going to scapegoat Elizabeth Holmes because she tried to be the next Steve Jobs. She got gassed up on herself. So now y'all going to love hating on Elizabeth Holmes. You're going to forget all about us, and we'll move on to the next harvest.
And who was on their board at Theranos? There was Henry Kissinger and Mattis were on the board of that company.
Boom. Boom. And I didn't even know that shit before I went to those examples, because that's where I'm like, I see their patterns and I see them getting closer and closer to being caught in real time, and I see them throwing them their harvest under the bus. Like Brock Pierce, that was another harvest that got thrown under the bus because they're getting more brazen. I'll give them that. Like Brock Pierce, whenever he decided he was gonna run for president, I'm like, whenever I saw that shit, I'm like, okay, this dude has lost his fucking mind, because first off, anybody who can go use Google can figure out there's a whole lot of shit that Brock Pierce has been accused of, and over the course of years, lots and lots of proof. Brock Pierce is a questionable character, to say the least. To say the things that can be said, the things he's now under investigation for, he clearly committed fucking insider trading, but it was in crypto, so it was unregulated. So we'll see if he gets jail time for it. But he definitely did some insider trading. So if you're doing insider trading and then thinking you're about to fucking run for president, you're psycho. That person is psycho, and he's being gassed up by people who are making money off of him. When EOS became a $4 billion blockchain, nobody listening to this has probably ever heard of it except maybe Tien.
Yeah, I've heard of EOS.
Tien might be the only other person who's hearing this. How have you not heard of something that's $4 billion? Because it was a fucking sham. That's how. So they created all this value, quote unquote, $4 billion blockchain off of hype. It's not terrible. I mean, mind you, the technology isn't terrible, but the dude that built it let himself get gassed up by Brock Pierce, who was just trying to make money, helping his shadow investors make money. And that's why I'm like, man, there's no Illuminati, but there's a bunch of people that are shadow investors that gas people up and pay. I see how it works. They pay press release. They pay for press releases to go around, and then newspapers start running the press releases as secondhand information. So once you see something that's not a press release running a secondhand source, you don't know where information originally came from. And by the time you find out, it's already too late because you already made the investment. So, sorry, go ahead.
If you want to talk about media control and investment in corporate growth, one of the investors in Theranos, which was Elizabeth Holmes' company, was Rupert Murdoch.
This onion gets nastier and more rotten.
And her trial has actually been pushed back even further into this
There
year.
you go.
She's not even, no sentence has been passed. She's out.
Mainly because somebody, she wasn't the mastermind.
She made the right friends, essentially.
Yep. And had the right shadow puppets to get her to where she was. I'm like, I don't necessarily feel bad for her, but I know she did not mastermind what she ended up getting caught for. Somebody else masterminded it around her in a way that she wasn't even aware of. And if she was aware, she let herself think it wasn't real in a way that she was able to then portray that she actually believed in her product, even though she was lying about her product. So there's all these layers to it that you can't get as far as she did without lying to yourself a little bit.
I mean, she had a public and a private persona, like a lot of celebrities do.
Exactly. So
the whole way she carried herself, there were some interviews with people who used to work at the company who said that sometimes she would, especially in times of heightened stress, when the company was under greater scrutiny, the way she would present herself would sort of revert back to another format, and then all of a sudden she would catch herself and then switch back in the middle of a meeting.
No, again, yeah, she was lying to herself. We all know she was lying to herself. She was lying to us. But in lying to herself, it's this element of when people are like, oh, you got to sell your soul to the devil. It's not that simple. Like, you don't fucking get a contract in front of you where you're like, oh, cut your finger and sign on this with blood. It comes with lying to yourself about where your profits are coming from, where your investors are coming from, not seeing these invisible investors that are willing to put money on something without seeing the proof and fact checking the proof. When you know you faked it, thinking that you can get through the first year, and then you start making billions of dollars off of shit that's fake because the people who invested didn't look at it, and then you have to keep lying to yourself. That's how the fucking deal with the devil happens. There's no actual fucking blood on the dotted line. And that's the fucked up thing about it, where I saw that shit playing out in real time, where I'm like, I'm seeing her lie to us and lie to herself, and I'm thinking to myself, like, that's what's happening. And then I look at the Martin Shkreli thing, and I'm like, this is a whole different monster, because this dude's just a straight psychopath that's lying to everybody, but not lying to himself, because he knows that everything he's saying is bullshit. And he's already like accepted that from the get-go. He's not, it's like not even a question to him. It's already bullshit. This is a complete different type of monster. Like, to me, you can't equate those two, because one of them is lying to themselves and the other one is 100% honest with themselves about them just not giving a fuck about exploiting people.
So, for people who aren't aware of who Martin Shkreli is, he is a convicted felon and former hedge fund manager, and he basically sold out. Let's see where this. Okay, he was criticized for after he obtained the manufacturing license for an anti-parasitic drug, Daraprim, and raised the price by a factor of 56. So from $13.50 to $750 a pill. And the media referred to him as the most hated man in America and pharma bro. He also offered to create a vaccine for COVID if he was released from prison. So that's the kind of asshole that he is.
Right, knowing he's not a chemist, like the idea of him. That
you mean he would get out and get someone else to do it for him, and then he would be like, "Oh, look what I did."
Yeah.
That's pretty much.
You know,
in some of the interviews that I've seen of him, his approach is to try and understand some very specific, intricate aspects of the technology that he's working with on a level that allows him to speak somewhat technically with the people who are actually doing the scientific research. I mean, like and then that way he inspires confidence of the people who work at the companies that he used to run.
Yeah.
He's definitively the facade for profit. Like that's what we're talking about with like a lot of the politicians and a lot of these companies is a huge facade face that if enough people are doing it, they're going to try to get away with it because there's so many people doing it. So that deal with the devil is really a deal with yourself and how much you're willing to actually fucking do. Yep. Like, and like, how bad are you willing to do the worst thing to get that bottom line done? So you put on a facade, you put on a face just to get it done. It's like, you know, that hitman that's got his hair pulled back tight from all the 80s and like 90s stuff where he's a big bulky dude and long hair and a slick ponytail. You know, he goes home, lets that hair down and puts on some easy listening. Like, but he decided to do that bad thing to get that bottom line done. How far can that go? We already seen it everywhere. We've seen it in Wall Street. We're watching, Dayglow Cheeto walking, talking inflatable doll do it every day in the news now. Like, it's a facade that when other people see how clear that facade is, the back of our minds just freak out. They're like, we all realize this is batshit, right? And then it causes everyone to go, what the actual fuck? Since the podcast thing I'm going to try to do with you guys, since I started talking about that, and like some of the posts I do is, you know, what the actual fuck? How is this actually a thing? I've seen a lot of other people kind of do that thing. And it's like, They find something and we all read the story and we're like, what the fuck? We could see the facade so easy now. And it's in so many facets of modern society that we have right now. It's getting easier to call it out. It's getting easier to see. And I think that's scaring a lot of people.
Most definitely. I think part of it too is then when you know it was always there and you have a generation of people who just let it be there, I think they're feeling bad. And then that's part of the reason they don't want to acknowledge it still is like,
oh, the whole don't talk about it thing that we were talking about yesterday. Like when someone does something like that and then they tell you, hey, don't worry about it. Just forget it. This is normal. It's okay. Just go away. Don't worry. You're telling me how to react to me seeing a physical bad thing or a lie or something that's affecting a lot of people, like what's going on right now in COVID land.
Yeah, it's a very common tactic from governments, actually.
Oh, yeah. 4 million. That's how many we got in the United States. 4 million cases total.
Yeah. What was it like? What was it? 60 days to the first million, 28 or 45 to the second, 24 to the third, and then 15 to the fourth. It's something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's like definitely accelerating.
Oh yeah. Let me see if I can find a good chart that I can throw into the system. Oh, here I found a logarithmic chart. Let me pull that up.
Yeah, so if it continues, it'll be a week before we get our 5th million or something like that.
Escalation goes faster, critical mass happens quicker.
Yep. So, well, especially with like some states still not shutting down. I'm like,
Indianapolis today totally shut down all their bars again. They're like, nope. The
statewide one goes into effect in 4 days too.
Yeah. And from where I'm at here in Bloomington, and then what I hear about in other places surrounding smaller towns or surrounding towns, the demographic is very wide and very varied in how people are receiving it and what they're choosing to react like. You could see how much different the want and will of what early education was in certain demographics. Like I went to school everywhere. Like I was born in Texas, lived in Southern California, Las Vegas, Florida, and Orlando, and then here. And I spent the time in a lot of different places. School books are completely different, and how you get that information to prepare yourself to somewhat becoming an adult. I wanted to pay attention to a lot of sciences. I wanted to pay attention to that stuff. Like that's stuff that you're going to have to no matter what use every day. And you can definitely tell that like there's a lot of people that probably never made it past anything close to a 9th grade education about how to interpret science or your surroundings or critical thinking. And you're like, I'm seeing like, Indianapolis, big city, but you see all the comments and all the different threads of different news sources and how people just rip apart. And then you see smaller places and then you see their public format of speaking on it and how the conversations change and what's the most adamant feeling of both groups. And it's a really weird demographic. And especially for Bloomington, like we got Chicago one way, Louisville another way. Those are 2 real big hotbeds right now for a lot of attention. And just being aware of that surrounding, you just see a lot of people that are just, one, having trouble interpreting the information that's coming in.
So there's a discerning quality in governance according to the economic structure of a state. And I think that can be represented by how governors are responding and shutting things down or not shutting things down or keeping things open. For instance, I think there may be a case to say that in states where there is more where there's more emphasis on short-term economic stimulus and returns on investments, for instance, from businesses that rely solely upon tourism or entertainment or things along those lines, or essentially any business that provides a short-term return that relies upon a service economy only. Those are the states that refused or held back predominantly on shutting down because they didn't want to have their state economies collapse, or they didn't want their numbers to go down too much, which is exploitative. And then if you compare it to the Northeast, which was hit relatively hard, there's a lot of reliance on tourism in the Northeast as well, but there's also a lot of different industries in those states that could provide for a different kind of safety net economically.
Yeah, we didn't have
a
we didn't have a backup safety net a lot, like throughout Indiana. It looks like everything's still really derived in steel and coal. A lot of coal. Coal just got a huge stimulus package actually in the state, which is ridiculous. But we don't have that backup in Indianapolis. I mean, hell, they remodeled part of the downtown just to facilitate the Super Bowl, and we haven't had another thing in Indianapolis to even warrant that kind of construction. So it created a lot of jobs back then, but it was only for that short-lived time period. And then now we have this whole entire infrastructure that can't even be used because it was solely derived, putting eggs in one basket kind of thing, into tourism. Their downtown, they try to turn tourism. They gentrified certain areas. They got more hotels. They made a new park. They fancied something up, but it's all really just based off of tourism. Indy 500, the amount of people that come in just for Indy 500 and how much of them drink and need Ubers and the service industry off of that, that's all Indiana was. Like Indiana and Bloomington, the same thing. We're a tourist town. We're a retirement community. We got a lake and we got college students. They're a 4-year, sometimes 6-year tourist, So like we have to derive every way of life off of that. That determines our grocery store hours, how much food they're ordering in and pumping out. I mean, if we had our 83,000 year-round population here, and then on top of that, do our student population, our Krogers are going through like millions. Like I talked to a person, they said they did 2.9 million in one day when students all finally got back and like filled up all the apartments over there by the east side. They were the busiest Kroger in the state for that year on that one day. And it's like, well, we don't have that now. We don't have that tourism crowd. We don't have the people moving. Everything's stalled out because we had no backup. We have a lot of agriculture, but man, most of the corn around here is like barely up to my chest right now. Like does not look like it's growing like at the rate it was. A lot of it got subsidied and bailed out.
Yep. And it didn't used to be like this until we won the Super Bowl, and then they started focusing really heavy because before, they had the 500 once a year. And then they were trying to do IndyCar League, and that just didn't work. And they had MLS. So there's like all these things that they have, the Indianapolis Indians, they have the Indianapolis Ice, the Pacers, the Colts. There's all these things that they had in the city for a long time that were not tourist attractions necessarily. And then as soon as the Colts won that Super Bowl, that's when Indianapolis started being mentioned on like 30 Rock or like it would come up, or Indiana, like they did what's it called? Stranger Things takes place in Indiana.
Yeah.
Like, Indiana became something that's in media now. Before the Super Bowl, it was like Indiana was non-existent in media.
Well, look how much sports gambling has come since the
For sure.
Super Bowl. Like we passed all kinds of ridiculous laws really, really, really fast.
Yep.
And now we're getting like off-track betting, and we're getting internet betting. And there's a guy that got busted with like, it was something like 3 or 4 million that was doing best before casinos can do it. And like through about a year, there was a whole bunch of like underground gambling that got busted throughout the state of Indiana, shut all that down. And then right after that, they're like, oh, here's this brand new casino. Oh, here's another brand new casino. And they just started popping up really quick. They just put one in southern Indiana that was a huge extension after getting a riverboat off, and then using its gambling license to transfer it to the building. Huge renovation on it. And we got Hammond, and there's Plainfield. Like they went nuts with betting. IU was a big part of that because it had college betting.
Yep.
And that was another touristy. You have to go out and kind of be a tourist to go to this one place to do it, spend money only here, kind of event space or lifestyle.
So a lot of the projects that you just mentioned, one of the reasons why the pandemic has been so devastating and has also drawn varying responses from state government is because a lot of those projects provide revenue and taxable income for the states, but a lot of those projects were financed with debt. And if those projects essentially can't pay for their establishment, they can't provide revenue that or profits or anything that could be taxable. They're not doing any business, and they might actually collapse, and then you have these unusable chunks of land.
Yeah, you're taxing it on the income. There's no income.
Right, and if you have to pay taxes on the land, yeah, exactly. If you have to pay taxes on the land that the location is at, right, then on top of that, and if there's a mortgage, you know,
it's a super sandbag effect. Like it just keeps sandbagging. Yeah, holy crap.
It'll just keep sinking and imploding upon itself unless there's some way to pay off those debts. And that's why people, you know, and small businesses are structured like that too. It's just on a smaller scale. And that's why people are so desperate to keep these businesses open in these various states, because if people don't buy and if people don't come in and spend, then essentially all these businesses are just going to collapse. They won't be able to pay for themselves.
That's why I definitely did believe in like what Canada was doing. And like pretty much you're freezing all your rent, all your mortgage, any interest that would gain on any side accruing account, loans, student loans, and then you're getting a solid government help. Like what were they doing altogether? Like $1,200 a month for a person, and a bit more if you had a kid. And then you still paid utilities, because I get that. Everybody needs utilities. You need air conditioning when it's 110 out. You know, like you need heat when it's like, you know, -2. So that stuff still has to run. That's basic infrastructure of ensuring people are alive. They need that basic human quality. But everything else can freeze for a little bit and still come out relatively safe if they have a little bit of money to spend, so they can buy food on an Uber, or they could, you know, buy books on Amazon, or whatever choice they go through. There's an economy that can still work. But it just seems like the stick in the tire that we're having right now in America is this huge gap in between the stimulus checks and the warranting of the stimulus checks, because right now a lot of people wouldn't. I have friends that have had to live in backyards in tents. I've had like friends say that, like, you know, they're losing their place. It's them, their mom, and their kids. And if we were taken care of right now, like we should, for what we designed the federal government for, we wouldn't be in this predicament at all. There would still be somewhat of an economy going to ensure that it's an easier kickstart when we have to get back to it, and when we can get back to it. But right now, it just seems like we're doing that proverbial sandbagging ourselves over and over and over again with these things, because we did put our main economy into a one basket of, we can't really salvage it once it goes past a certain point, or it's incredibly hard and it's going to cost way more money in the long run to even get that wheel rolling again.
By the way, Stimulus 2 is in, it's the Republicans in the Senate finally put it to the floor. So they're going to vote on it soon.
Right. And I feel like up until this point, something was done. We got the $1,200 stimulus checks to people at a various income, and then prorated based off of how much somebody made after that. And then if people are unemployed, they get their unemployment assistance if they're lucky enough. And on top of that, they get the $600 a week extra if they're lucky enough and qualified for that program. And then on top of that, there was the PPP for small businesses to take out loans, and not all the money really went to actual small businesses, only some did. And yeah.
You systemically take all the money out of what actually makes it function. The people's bank accounts, their savings, like the money they have to free spend, they didn't give it to that. Really, if the economy is us, and as a society, that's how we make this economy keep turning over, is that money didn't go to us. Those restaurants, those businesses, those shops, they all would have gotten money if we had money to spend.
Right. Think about the next step beyond those business locations. Again, so much of our economy is financed by debt. A mortgage is essentially taking on a debt. right? And you have to pay that off over time, or else you lose your property, or it's not really your property. It's the bank's property that you signed on to take care of for them for a specific number of years until you pay that off.
Serfdom.
Right, serfdom.
So in full effect.
So getting $600 a month, I think the government was hoping that people would just spend that at businesses that they would then be able to keep open, so that the businesses that get the PPP loan can then pay their mortgages and stay open. But the thing is, and that's why there are these states that are basically not closing anything, because if people default on their mortgages or they can't pay their rents, then the landlords of the buildings that these businesses are in start not being able, because they're over leveraged already, right? Yeah. What if they're working on a mortgage? If they're a company, or if they're a single, owner, or they own multiple properties that have tenants that can't pay, right? And on top of essentially losing out on income from that specific business because they can't pay their mortgage and they can't pay for the rent at the same time, or if they can't pay the debts for the businesses because they took out loans to sustain their businesses, right? Because not all the money that these small businesses are taking out is going directly to the people who work for the businesses. They're using it to sustain their business, which means that they're using some of that money probably to pay off debt.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have every small business in the United States all of a sudden default on all of their debts, then these banks are going to be left with basically like a whole bunch of people who can't pay off their debts.
It's like a two-tier system of borrow from Peter to pay Paul. Yeah. And so it's a vicious cycle after a while. If you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, just so one person in the long run actually gets the money out of it, then it's just like collateral damage at that point for the businesses and the people that are trying to support the business, because the money is still just really being funneled back to one fucking asshole. So
yeah. And if a loan is defaulted upon, or if multiple loans are defaulted upon, then it makes it harder for additional debt to be taken on. It makes it harder for additional loans to be taken out. And that's less business for the financial institutions.
Yeah. So it's eventually, it's literally, well, I think we're seeing the beginning of that now on how hard it's hitting all these things. And I think that's why it's becoming a little bit more aware. And that's why I said I was really agreeing with what Canada did, because that was a great idea. Freeze those things so no one gets screwed. Businesses are protected. It doesn't set off a ton of red flags and sandbag people for the next 180 years of their family's lineage. Because that debt, if it is accrued, will get passed down. And so you're talking about putting 10 sticks in one tire at once and just being like, this is going to happen. And it's going to perpetually happen for further generations of that. And we could solve it right now and take away the big sting of what would happen if we would kind of follow a model like that.
But then they won't get to hodl, and they won't get to consolidate the wealth, and then they won't be able to make extra money off of the labor that people provide that they didn't create themselves, and then they won't be able to, own everything.
Yeah, but just for a little bit. We know they're doing it, but they could just stop for a little bit
so
we can live
greedy motherfuckers.
And survive.
They can't.
We see in the housing market examples of how the wealthy or the super wealthy exploit just the regular wealthy. That's right. Wealth is tiered in the United States. It's tiered in most of the Western world.
those old British diagrams of the tiers of government? It's it kind of models old biblical text of the levels of hell or going up to heaven. It's
right.
It's a fat cat on a round top, and then the next tier down is part of government, and the next tier down is the people, and the next tier down is the peasants, and the next tier down is it feels like we're just having very well designed and well written articles and imagery that is basically that happening in modern times.
Well, now we have a tier of people who are pretending to be wealthy, because there are these multi-million-dollar homes that just pop up all over the United States. And it was really hard for me to wrap my head around that many people having, $400,000 to make a down payment on that house and get a regular mortgage for it. And there's actually something called a jumbo mortgage, which is not insured the same way by the federal government as a mortgage that you can take out on a home if you're making the minimum down payment in order to get the best interest rate. So if you want to buy a multi-million-dollar home, like a 1.2 million or even a $5 million home, you can take out what's called a jumbo mortgage. And that is something that people are starting to default on now. So you're having all these people who were essentially taking on far too much debt just to portray a specific level of lifestyle that they actually did not have the resources to sustain to begin with. It's just an illusion.
Well,
so,
our system wasn't able to tell that it was an illusion. So right there, you have a system that was incapable of discerning who was actually able to sustain these loans and then giving them to specific demographics based on pure assumptions and not actual scientific facts. So then that's where this is going to sound crazy, and some people will get it at first. The easiest way to get rid of wealth inequality while simultaneously getting rid of the 1%, and the only bloodless way to do it is by getting rid of the United States dollar and starting an entirely new currency.
I mean, we talked about, I remember having heard comments of the with the digital currency before in past episodes, it's going to be like Lost in Space, where you just have an iPhone basically digitally implanted in your wrist, and it's just going to be like all your information, brand new currency, you'll be able to have all this technology right there, and that's the new currency. It's like credits. It's like Guardians of the Galaxy credits.
Somebody said that who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, because you already have that, except it's not implanted in your fucking arm. And doesn't So anybody who's ever had a bank account that they checked online, anybody who's ever used their debit card or a credit card already does that and doesn't have the shit in their arm. So the idea that you need to have this chip implanted in your arm to use digital currency, that shit some dumbass came up with to scare people away, or somebody intentionally trying to subvert the idea of getting off the digital dollar. Because the only people who are going to benefit from switching currency are poor people. Rich people aren't going to benefit from getting rid of the United States dollar because they have all of them. We're fighting over 1% of the fucking money amongst ourselves, and 70% of it is in 1% of the population's hands, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, no, if you switch to a digital dollar, that'll be the mark of the beast. Don't do that. Don't do that. That'll make you a Satan worshiper. Keep this fucking dollar that I have most of."
System. Make them believe it. It's like a wooden nickels. It's the factory store,
This system, if you get out of the system in which you're subjugated now, you're going to hell. That's what those people are saying.
Well, the currency system in the United States, the dollar itself, has been subject to significant inflation, and the organizations that profit most off of inflation have prevented wages from rising in accordance with inflation. So the currency system allows for a high level of mass exploitation.
Yep, because then that's the whole reason, obviously, Tim was saying a viewpoint that a lot of people have probably heard. And the whole reason I framed it that way in response is because those people who are afraid of digital currency and transitioning out of the US dollar dependence are the same motherfuckers that'll turn around and then talk about the Federal Reserve and the Illuminati and the Rothschilds. It's the same fucking people. And it's crazy how much cognitive dissonance there is in the people who are willing to frame a conspiracy theory around the Federal Reserve being corrupt and being driven by fucking foreign bankers, and then not want to get off of the US dollar. It's like the most cognitive dissonant thing that one could ever actually come up with.
Yeah, no, that's the sarcasm behind why I was mentioning it, because we've had it in TV and movies for years, since the beginning of the 90s and stuff, and and before that, even with Star Trek and stuff like that. It's always kind of hinted that that's the future. It's gonna go to a new currency. The dollar will go extinct. And that idea of that was the reason behind my sarcasm.
Well, I was gonna say, even in Star Trek, they don't have currency. The Federation doesn't have currency.
Well, yeah, not the Federation. Yeah, I'm saying both Frangries, had their latinum.
And the Federation keeps gold-plated latinum around because sometimes they encounter situations abroad where they need it, but it's not actually like currency isn't something that the Federation.
Yeah, it's a resource. It's not a tool of their survival or society.
Exactly.
Right. The Federation like uses resources like water in order to make things happen.
Well, and it's because they've mastered molecular efficiency, so that's where they are able to. I don't think they specifically discussed it on the show, but what I think you're supposed to be assuming is that they're turning all of their shit back into their food. And it's like in a way.
Yeah, the recyclers, yeah.
Yeah, because again, it's like they don't really discuss it, but all of the they address that the stuff in the replicators isn't coming out of thin air. Like it has to be fabricated from somewhere. And I think it's like, I want to say in maybe Discovery, they might talk about how it's like recycling like the shit, but they don't.
In the real world, I think about 8 years ago, there was a report that came out that a student, either Japan or China, I can't remember, took the protein compounds of human fecal matter and extracted it and was actually able to make a simulated burger out of it.
Working with shit food for a while now.
Yeah, and like, well, the thing about with Star Trek is the eventuality and the absolute that'll eventually happen is that all of our science needs to be uniform, on the same page, and the most accurate for a living species of the human race across the board. We need not the illustrious money want, because all of our information and all of our needs are taken care of. Like, yep. Our science has to be up there. We need to not distract ourselves with, I guess, more petty wants. And that's like, I want to see one thing from Star Trek happen before I die. All right, like I want to get to there. I want to get kind of to there. Like a science wave that comes through of like general, the world just understands we're on the same page, that we are all just a brain with a nervous system, and you know, we get protection with skin and muscle and bone. Like, let's 100% figure out the most safe way and ethical way to keep all of us alive and be able to perpetuate ourselves to be cleaner, safer, and better, thrive at our life. And I think that's what Star Trek really had for me.
Well, I just happened to watch an episode yesterday where there were 3 people they're supposed to be, I think, from the 21st century who got cryogenically frozen. And then the Enterprise finds them in the future and they unfreeze them.
The rock and roller with the liver that he got replaced, and yeah.
The rich guy,
of them
the woman
is a mom, and then the other guy is a banker, and they have all these different perspectives that are supposed to represent the 21st century and how people were thinking about things. And the one guy is like super obsessed with money, and he can only think about things from the perspective of money. And then the woman is like, you know, she's just trying to connect with somebody and connect with her family. And the one guy is just trying to party. That's all he cares about, is trying
to. Yeah. He just wanted to get messed up really bad the whole time.
It was just giving a caricature of how people in our times get stuck in these mindsets. Whereas the woman obviously had the most had the most moral integrity in her perspective. But they were even trying to frame her as if like only being about your family is like, it's not multidimensional. Like, you know, they were trying to get, like, the whole thing was, now that she was in a new time, she had a chance to actually discover herself because she wasn't focused on her family the whole time, and she had time to become something of herself. So this is like, yes, if you become a parent and then your entire life is only a parent, you're not a multidimensional human being anymore, and that's not good for humanity at all. So there's like, they're addressing like, it's not good to be focused on money. It's not good to be focused on partying. It's not good to be focused on constantly being a support system for somebody else, because it wasn't even about the family aspect. It was about the fact that she never took time to focus on herself. And that's what they were showing is like our century does not really care about self-growth, and then we'll use like, oh, I'm taking care of my family, and like, oh, I don't give a fuck about myself. I don't have time to wash. I don't have time to brush my teeth because I have to fucking make my kids dinner. I have to do all this stuff for my kids. Well, that's not good for society either. If you feel that you need to do so much for someone else, even though they're your family, that you end up neglecting yourself, it sounds good at first, but that's not actually good. And there's all these things about you know, being a multi-dimensional person that, you know, I think we always focus on the monetary aspect, but capitalism is just one aspect of the things we need to work on as a society. And it's like, yeah, we can't just be mindlessly like, oh, this is like what we need to do to support families. We need to be critical about how we're you know, looking and thinking about the familial structure. Are we empowering people to be good parents? Because as of right now, we're forcing parents to make a decision between sacrificing the teachers' lives and not being able to give their kids an education. Is that empowering our parents? I don't think.
I'm saying, see, I've made this reference a few times in the comment sections on the show. NoFX had a song where it said, making everyone the same is the end game. And that's like, we're seeing some of those story arcs of an end game kind of play out right now by trying to make it all uniform and someone else's decision that does not have the right to make that decision for you or your kid or your teacher. And, we're seeing more and more like Trump's trying to make a one government thing. Putin's locked himself in for how long now?
Another 16 years.
Yeah, like he's locked himself into a position of power. He's making everything the same. And when you make everything the same, that is the literal end game, because all aspects of that are now controlled or pre-expected, that if it deviates from this control, they already are prepared for it.
Well, but full circle, what we have learned is that as soon as everything is the same, that is a stage for an extinction level event.
Exactly.
And the actual homogenous aspect of something becomes its ultimate demise, you know. And
why do you think Rome burnt? Why do you think the Mayans disappeared? Why do you think the adobe villages and the sides of the cliffs in New Mexico just disappeared overnight?
Well, we actually know why Rome burnt. It's because Nero was a piece of shit and he wanted to buy the land.
No, exactly. But they reached the critical mass of what their society could handle. And
he
that's
literally,
a common denominator in all of them.
Nero literally burned Rome down because he wanted to buy the land up at bargain basement prices. It was a cash grab for Nero. But it hit its critical mass of how it could sustain itself, then collapsed.
I was gonna say the Mayans was a gradual migration, and that's like one of the things that like Ancient Aliens has framed it as if it was this overnight thing in a mystery. There's no mystery behind.
Well, no. Like I'm not saying it like it happened that quick, but I'm just saying like it eventually dried out because it was not sustainable for what their structures were trying to.
Well, that's partially true. The Mayan civilization, they kind of lost out in terms of being able to acquire water. So they actually had this giant well, and it was deep as it gets, but they got to a point where they couldn't actually dig any deeper without incurring serious physical trauma. Like the pressure was so great that they couldn't breathe, or people were getting, suffering from dehydration, even though they were drinking water nonstop. And so they had a water issue and climate change, among other things, and so they couldn't irrigate their crops, and so they slowly moved away. And the same thing pretty much happened with the Incas, and we know this because they're just now finding all of these structures. They get smaller and smaller as they move away from the epicenter of Incan civilization. And we can find this because our satellite technology has sensors that are so accurate now that they can map down into the Earth from space. So there's your Star Trek technology.
Yeah, no, I've seen some of that. There was like a kid that like used the technology when it first came out and found a mound that was actually, he's like, well, this is probably a place, and it was.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of shit like that is happening now, where the stories that they're trying to give us with 10% of the information, we're getting the 90% of the other information that's left. Well, I guess not all of it. Sometimes 70%, 60%, whatever's left around, to then start filling in the gaps that then completely go against these constructs that were established to create paradigms of authority for information distribution, that now, because we are all more familiar with the scientific method, we are not as quick to establish those types of information distribution channels, but we're also able to deconstruct what we were previously told, filling it in with new information without just taking in unfounded claims. And I
think that's what, like, as a society and the people that are trying to still be intellectual and social about it, of going through COVID land, is that this is the first time that a society this big with this amount of money market, and we have a lot of it's money trade, information trade, government. We have the ability to be aware of any downfall that we might run into. And we have the possibility of learning new information and plugging it in fast enough in the right way to get the right thing to happen. Now, the only thing is we're waiting on is, can we actually do it?
Yep.
Well, one of the keys, I think, to evolution as a society or as a species is an egalitarian embrace of diversity. And I think that's what the Federation sort of embodies, is that it's comprised of, just about every nation that's willing to, contribute and grow and learn, and then also an egalitarian approach to the dissemination of information, and that being education.
Yeah, I've been a long time believer of, like, earlier education, learn stuff earlier. The studies alone in music, and I love music, and they're doing studies that kids that, like, got introduced to it a little bit earlier, just like were around it. The mom, put headphones on her pregnant belly, and when the kid was born, like, they took him to concerts, with headphones respectively, but they saw people perform. They tend to have, like, this greater, quicker learning knowledge of music. And then that's how we're getting these videos of, like, a 9-year-old girl in a mall in Japan just ripping some drums. And we get, like, an 11-year-old in Ohio or something like that that's just, like, ripping a Slash riff. And this kid, it's easy to him. It's so easy to him because they got introduced early enough. So the proper primary and secondary education, I think, is going to be key to getting to anywhere close to having Star Trek happen before I die. Is that the fact that these basic common truths and knowledge of science, how do you take care of yourself, sanitization, how to, like, work with the money, work with the market that we have, the world that's actually outside of high school. If that got better, think of at least just one generation that had the right information given to them through school. Think of that first generation that got all the knowledge that they actually needed. And they learned about government, and they learned about money, and they learned about banking. Think if that happened the first time, the progressive change you would see in the first 5 years after they graduated high school. I think that would change hugely every bit of society that is in America right now. If that proper amount of the right information of how to take care of yourself and how to function was actually there, and had a way that it was communicated properly, that it was learned and it was ingrained in your head, like, hey, this is how organics work. This is botany. This is air. This is why the sun's hot. Like, some people are, don't believe the moon's real. Like, so if that level, like, imagine the first senior class that graduated, that information actually took hold, and it was there. It was rooted, and it was all shared common knowledge. Imagine the first 5 years of prosperity after that person graduated high school.
As long as those people aren't disenfranchised.
Yeah, I was going to say, their prosperity would depend on a bunch of old people not being their impediment.
Yeah, but if they choose to take the information they're taking in and using it for the simple facts of being prosperous for all, then they're being the first of a kind. There's always, my cousin talked to me about this, and it was like, you can always be there for your family, but it's also really important to remember that you could be the first in your family to do something epic. And if, say, some of your family is kind of ingrained racist or comes from a different era, or, you love them, you're not going to unfriend them on Facebook, but they speak some really bad rhetoric. You don't have to give a platform from that, and you don't have to be accepting of it. You could be the first of your kind in something new that's going to help everything at the same time. And if, like I'm saying, if that class, if there was, like, it'd probably take a little bit of time, pick up off the training wheels, take them off, let it roll. Like, so it'd probably take 5-6 years of the same curriculum just being constantly there. I'd say 2 years past a 4-year high school career for that graduating senior class after 6 years or whatever, like knowing that that information is going to be there and then taking 4 years of it. When they graduate, the amount that humanity can get done as a whole, being on the same page of the same book at the same time, what could get done with it instead of the disenfranchisement of different schools having different levels of their information, older books. They didn't have the funding for it. Like I said, I lived in multiple places. I've seen several different math books that are all kind of very hard to understand. A couple of them are pretty easy. English books that were just completely outdated compared to other places that I went to school at. So that first generation, if we can just get to that first generation of everybody being on that same page of the same knowledge of this is how we take care of each other and this is where we can go with it, and the possibilities of empowering ourselves to be better is endless. Once we get to that generation, I would love to see the first 5 years of that and just watch the exponential growth that would happen on a global level after a while, because it's going to start influencing so many other facets of life.
Yeah, I've been a long time believer that education is the path to set us free. It's not just higher education. It's that education itself as a whole needs to be reimagined in a way that enables people to gain access to resources. Because we can't just pretend that, some kid who lives in suburbia with both his parents who can afford to buy that $400,000 down payment house, or maybe they can't. We can't pretend that that person has the same, or the quality of opportunity that they have access to and the resources they have access to are the same that a kid who lives in a city and only has one parent in the household has.
Well, thirst for knowledge and the want for processing knowledge.
Yeah, that's the thing. At some point we get to a place where the society as a whole needs to be reimagined in a way, or needs to reimagine education as something that is valuable. And the reality is our society values the wrong things. Like right now, our society values money. Right now, our society values things. Right now, our society values control. And not just control, but the kind of control that gets forced down people's throats. And that's no way to live. It just maintains this consistent structure, this imbalance. You can't go protest if you got to work 40 hours a week. You can't change the society if you have to work all the time. You can't even develop a good hobby, a good meaningful hobby, which will allow you to survive through pandemic if you have to work all the time. So the only thing you can do is come home and touch your fondle slab. And that's unfortunate, because our society was sold as this fantastic system that unlocks potential. But we found that it can't even do that anymore.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.